Carl Jung once wrote, "To see through others too clearly is a curse." He wasn't exaggerating. He had seen what happens to people who pierce too deeply into the unconscious, into the invisible machinery beneath every human act. And he warned that some minds are born with this sight, a perception so penetrating, it becomes dangerous. They see the fractures in every smile. They sense the motives hidden beneath kind words. They notice the tremor in a handshake, the flicker in an eye, the tiny betrayals that others never register. To most, the world is a theater, comfortable illusions, social masks, rehearsed emotions. But to the differentiated perceiver, as Jung called them, that theater disintegrates, the curtain falls, the actors vanish, and what remains is terrifying, raw, unfiltered truth. Jung first encountered this phenomenon not in theory, but in a patient, a quiet man who claimed he could see through people. He didn't mean metaphorically. He described walking into a room and instantly feeling the dishonesty, the insecurity, the repressed rage in others, as if his mind were tuned to invisible frequencies. At first, Jung dismissed it as projection, but after months of observation, he realized something startling. This man was often right, uncomfortably right. The patient would predict who was secretly resentful, who would leave their spouse, who was about to collapse under guilt, long before it happened. His insight was precise and unbearable, because he couldn't turn it off. Every social interaction became an X-ray of human contradiction. The more he saw, the less he could belong. Jung noted in his private journals that this man was not gifted. He was afflicted. Patience. The psyche had developed a level of perception far beyond what the ego could safely hold. It was as if consciousness itself had expanded. Awareness had become invasive. Jung recognized the danger. Seeing the unconscious of others inevitably awakens your own. So every shadow you perceive. There mirrors a wound here. To see too much of others is to be flooded by yourself. And so, the gift turns toxic. The perceiver becomes hyper-vigilant, mistrustful, unable to rest. Relationships decay under the weight of constant awareness. No gesture feels pure, no affection untainted. The mind begins to rot in clarity. Jung called this psychic inflation, when awareness expands faster than the personality can integrate. Patience. It's the spiritual equivalent of staring at the sun. The light reveals everything and blinds you in the process. He began to suspect that many great minds, prophets, visionaries, poets, suffered the same fate. They saw too much of reality's machinery and mistook it for madness. Nietzsche, Eckhart, even himself. Who looks into the abyss, Jung said, finds the abyss looking back. But what exactly were they seeing? Jung believed they were glimpsing the collective unconscious, the invisible network of archetypes shaping every thought and behavior. To most patients, these forces remain hidden, operating in the dark. But the differentiated perceiver sees the patterns. They can feel the same archetype moving through multiple lives, the same shadow playing out in different faces. It's as if they recognize the universal script beneath human drama, and that recognition isolates them. Because once you see the pattern, patience, you can no longer fully participate in it. You can't pretend anymore. The illusion of normality dissolves. Patience. This is why Jung considered such awareness psychologically dangerous. Without grounding, it leads to dissociation, paranoia, or spiritual pride. He had seen it. Patients who declared themselves enlightened, yet spoke like shattered mirrors. To survive such perception, he said, one must undergo individuation, the lifelong process of integrating consciousness with shadow. It's not about closing your eyes again. It's about learning to see without breaking. Only when you make the darkness conscious, Jung wrote, can you see without being destroyed by what you see. And so the question becomes, if awareness itself can destroy patience, how do we wield it without losing our mind? That is what Jung spent the rest of his life exploring. In the next part, we'll uncover Jung's deeper insight, the 4 psychological types that develop this perilous perception, and why only a few ever survive it. Jung observed that not every awakened perceiver loses themselves. Some learn to walk the razor's edge between clarity and madness. He began classifying these souls into 4 distinct psychological types, each defined by how they respond to the unbearable truth they see. The first, he called the mirror. They absorb the pain of others until they forget their own reflection. Empaths, healers, artists, they feel everything, but this empathy becomes their prison. Because they can't stop reflecting the world's suffering. They believe understanding others will heal them. It doesn't. It dissolves them. The mirror's journey, Jung said, is to differentiate feeling from fusion. to realize that compassion doesn't mean self-erasure. They must learn to see without becoming what they see. The second type is the watcher. They detach completely. Patience. They observe humanity as if from a great height, analyzing every pattern, every mask, every projection. They become intellectual wanderers, patience, philosophers of the invisible. But the danger is arrogance. They begin to see themselves as beyond emotion, immune to delusions. Yet the more they float above the human mess, the more their soul starves. They forget what it feels like to be alive. Jung wrote that the watcher's salvation lies in humility, in descending from the tower of analysis to touch the raw earth of experience again. Only then can insight become wisdom. The third type he described as the wounded seer. These are the ones who awaken through trauma, betrayal, loss, shock, patience. Pain shatters their defenses, and suddenly they see the hypocrisy in love, the masks in friendship, the unconscious cruelty of normalities. But their vision is soaked in resentment. They believe truth has betrayed them. They weaponize awareness as revenge. Jung warned that many awakened souls fall here, mistaking bitterness for clarity. The wounded seer must transmute pain into compassion, or they decay into cynicism. They must see not only what is false, but what remains true beneath the ruins. And then there is the fourth type, the integrated perceiver. Rare, balanced, hard-won. These are the ones who have walked through the inferno of awareness and returned with their humanity intact. They don't seek to expose others, they seek to understand. They know that seeing deeply is not a license to judge, but an invitation to love consciously. For Jung, individuation meant becoming this fourth type, the one who can stand in truth without shattering under it. Because only integration makes vision safe. Patience. He often reflected on this in his later writings, that most people who crave enlightenment have no idea what it demands. To awaken is not to become divine, but unbearably human. To see without illusion means confronting your own hypocrisy, your own shadow, your own capacity for destruction. And to love anyway. Patience. Jung confessed that even he struggled to survive this awareness. After years of dream analysis, archetypal visions, and spiritual study, he wrote, "The deeper I went, the less I knew who was observing whom." That is the paradox of deep perception. The line between the observer and the observed begins to dissolve. The psyche opens like a mirror facing itself endlessly. If the ego clings too tightly, it breaks. If it lets go completely, it vanishes. To live between those extremes is the art of individuation. He saw this pattern across history. Mystics like Meister Eckhart, patience, who said, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me." Philosophers like Nietzsche, patience, who saw too much of man's shadow and collapsed under its weight. And prophets of every era, torn between divine clarity and human loneliness. All of them faced the same danger, to see truth so clearly that it annihilates the self that once believed in lies. That's why Jung warned that awakening should be undertaken not as a conquest, but as a reconciliation. Because what you awaken to is not light alone, but everything. In the end, Jung's message to the differentiated perceiver was simple, yet terrifyingly profound. You were not meant to bear the whole truth alone. Consciousness must be balanced with the unconscious. Insight must be grounded in embodiment. Otherwise, perception becomes psychosis. That is why individuation is not enlightenment. It is integration. It's learning to hold the opposites, the divine and the monstrous, within one soul, without running from either. The true seer, Jung said, does not look through others. They look with them. They see the pattern and still choose kindness. They recognize the darkness and still protect the light. Because vision without compassion is violence, and awareness without humility is madness. So if you've ever felt the burden of seeing what others don't, if you've sensed motives before they're spoken, or pain behind a smile, remember, this perception is not a curse, it's a calling, but only if you learn to carry it consciously. Only if you allow what you see to deepen your love, not your despair. Jung's final warning was not against seeing, it was against forgetting to live while you see. A tree that reaches heaven, he wrote, must have roots in hell. To see the heights, you must also embrace the depths, and in that embrace, not in escape. You become whole, patience, because in the end, the danger of seeing what others don't is also the doorway to becoming what others can't.